Hi, I'm Aura and I'm the host of Collective Mind, and I am going to tell the story, or technically a few different stories, of how we learned about our subsystems. So if you don't know what subsystems are, we've talked about them in a few different videos now. Like our video with the definitions of system terms. We talked about it, and I think in our Inner World video and probably some others. It has probably come up in some Meet the Alters videos and stuff like that. But the quick version is subsystems are any group of alters within a system that are separate in some way so as to form their own subgroup. And the two major ways that we know about, at least, that subsystems can exist within an inner world is to have a separate area of the inner world that's distinctly separate in some way, either with extra amnesia or physically in a separate place in the inner world or that kind of thing. And that could be the next town over from the main area of your inner world. And in our case, those types of subsystems in our system are mostly separated by portals, so they'll be in different dimensions kind of our inner world. And those subsystems generally get discovered by those of us who aren't in them through essentially through the jobs of the internal protectors and conflict negotiators and communications coordinators and gatekeepers and that kind of thing. So that's one of the main ways, is that Jaden, for instance, will be going about one of their 8 million jobs and will happen upon a portal they don't know where it goes and investigate that and discover a new subsystem, or meet an alter who is from that subsystem. Which brings me to the other main way that we'll find out about them, is an alter from that subsystem will front, and I will watch them talk to Primal Pack, or Primal Pack will tell us about it after the fact, usually both of those things. And if that alter shares any information about themselves, sometimes they'll share basically no information, sometimes they'll share a lot, and sometimes it'll be somewhere in between, saying that they are someone we don't know yet and that they're from a different area in the inner world, but no specifics, that kind of thing. Those types of subsystems, in our case, are typically deeper inside, and the alters from those subsystems tend to spend much less time fronting. Our gatekeeping subsystem would also probably fall into that category, but that subsystem is less deep inside, but those alters still don't spend much time fronting, so that's kind of in the gray area. But the other main type of subsystem that we know of is essentially an alter in the system having their own alters. Literally a system within a system. And what we call our core subsystems kind of feel like they fall in between those two definitions of subsystems, because it's not really a physical location, but it's also not really I'm the host of the music core subsystem, but I'm not the equivalent of the body for the music core subsystem, because one of the major differences is that for our core subsystems, Like, I'm going to use Jade and Snake as examples. Whether or not either of them is fronting in the body, like leaving that out of it for a minute, which I know this is kind of complicated. But if Jade is fronting for the dark core subsystem, and then Snake switches for the dark core subsystem, it's not like in the inner world, 2 other altars in the area. It won't still look like Jade. It will look like Snake. So it's like the subsystem as a whole shapeshifts into whoever is fronting for the subsystem, or it's like it's an invisible portal to a location, but the portal can move, and only one altar for the most part can be like outside of that subsystem portal at a time. And it also gets complicated because, like, Naya is in my subsystem, but she's not confined to my subsystem. She can leave the music core subsystem and go do other stuff. So it doesn't, like, cleanly fit into any of the definitions. But all of that aside, the rest of this is going to focus pretty much on how I and Jade found out about our subsystems, because the other 2 core subsystems knew about their subsystems already at the time that this like story happened, at the time that I found out about the system generally, and at the time that Jade and I both found out about our subsystems. The other 2 core subsystems, all or at least most of them, but including the hosts of those subsystems, knew about them already. The other thing about this that makes it kind of complicated is this story takes place before several of Jade's fusions. So if you've watched Jade's Meet the Altars video, this would be old Jade before the fusions with Primal or Mama Bear, or more recently Kitty. And, to complicate it even more, Primal and Mama Bear, and like Snake and other people from that subsystem, did know about the subsystem in a similar way as before I found out about the system as a whole, other altars in the system knew about it and were actively keeping the secret from me. So, like, one of the reasons for that is until we started looking more into like system information generally, before we started like actively researching it and watching videos people made and stuff like that, we didn't have a word for it. So we didn't have the word subsystem to describe what was happening. But Jade also couldn't go into her subsystem's inner world at the time. She would be like always co-fronting or like blackout amnesia for the subsystem, kind of like I am now for the system as a whole, if that makes sense. Jade can now go into the subsystem inner world, and I think started being able to even before the fusions, once she knew about the subsystem. I still can't go into my subsystem inner world, or just like the normal main inner world. I'm stuck here. But as far as how we found out about it, what Jade and I both thought before we knew was that we like shape-shifted, but it was still us, but we were different in some key ways, but we didn't think it was different enough for it to be a different altar. So, like, Jade thought that her, like, magical abilities in our inner world changed when she was in her primal form or her mama bear form type thing, and that she would, like, process emotions differently and things like that. And I had a similar thing. Like, I thought that I was age sliding when Pup from my subsystem would front, which, again, if you watched my updated Meet the Alters video, you would know that that is part of why I thought at first that my ears were Arctic fox ears, but now I know that they're actually wolf ears. I thought they were fox ears because I thought that Pup, who is an Arctic fox, was me but little. So I thought that when I wasn't little, I kept the ears, but I went like into the full animal form when I was little, which made sense at the time. So essentially, how we started finding out was in conversations generally, especially with Primal Pack, we would start describing the ways in which those different forms were different, especially with Jade, because she knew about the system as a whole for so much longer than I had. So she had been like experiencing this for so much longer. She had a lot of memories to pull from. And eventually, Jade in particular started realizing I feel totally different when I'm in those other forms, and everyone treats me very differently. I am capable of different things. People literally call me different names, technically. She thought of them as like titles, kind of, at the time. Like, she thought that people were just shortening, like, that's the primal version of Jade, to calling them Primal, but that was Primal's name. And eventually, as we kept talking about it, we just kind of started thinking, like, where is the line of this actually being a separate alter, but just with totally shared memories? And as we continued talking through that, eventually, Primal, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think so. Primal essentially, like, confessed that not only was it a subsystem, but it wasn't totally shared memories. And there is like less amnesia among the subsystem, like within the subsystem, than between other alters generally, for the most part. There's more memory sharing inside of the subsystem than outside of it, and easier communication and stuff like that, but it is not totally shared memories with no amnesia inside the subsystem. And the easiest way to explain it is still in terms of the Dark Core subsystem, so Jade's subsystem. Because that subsystem formed around trauma holders, one of the key ways that memory works within it is, for the most part at least, all of the alters in the subsystem know of the events, but different alters in the subsystem hold different pieces of the memory. So maybe one of them knows all of the details of what happened, but another one holds the emotional memory and another one holds the physical memory, that kind of thing. Or sometimes there will be like different genres of trauma happening within the same like time frame, and that'll be split up along like genre lines, basically, of like, you can hold this part of the trauma and you can hold this part of the trauma. And that was the main way that it was split up. So it was still close enough together that, like, as that subsystem was forming, trauma was still happening. So as new trauma happened, there was low enough amnesia for them to be able to do whatever they needed to do in the trauma situation, but high enough amnesia that essentially none of them were having full flashbacks. They were only having partial flashbacks, which was easier for them to handle at the time. Now Jade now has much more full flashbacks because she is like the result of several fusions of several of those trauma holders and protectors. But at the time, like, that was kind of why and how it functioned and why it functioned that way. So yeah, I basically had it confirmed for my subsystem at the same time that Primal confirmed the Dark Core subsystem, because there were more like maintaining amnesia reasons for the trauma holder subsystem to keep that secret than any of the other core subsystems. So it was essentially left up to Primal to make that call, because Primal at the time was functionally the primary protector of the Dark Core subsystem, basically. And that is... yeah, that's pretty much the story of how we found out. So it was kind of a slow process, but it was also in a way all at once. Like, the realization kind of hit all at once, where it was like, okay, but what about, like, what I just described about these different forms is less than a full alter? And that's when we were just kind of like, oh, yeah, that sure does seem to be like a whole alter. Okay. And then similarly to when I found out about the system as a whole, the process after the realization was other alters who had already known becoming more and more comfortable with the idea of that information being available and getting more and more comfortable sharing more of it. So I hope you liked this video about how we learned about our subsystems. If you did, please click the like button. It helps us a lot and tells YouTube to show our videos to more people, and they might like it too. And if you have any questions or ideas for future videos or comments or anything like that, feel free to put it in the comments section or come over to our Discord server, which is linked in the description, along with our Patreon and our Etsy shop. And if you're not subscribed, please do that so you don't miss any of our future videos. It's free and it's just like a click of a button. And you can also turn notifications on to make extra sure you don't miss any of our videos. But that also helps us a lot. And when we reach subscription goals, we post compilation videos. So that's another incentive to do that. But yeah. Thank you for watching. Bye.